In her novel, O Pioneers, Willa Cather has one of her characters remark that there are only 2 or 3 stories in the world, and they go on repeating themselves as if they had never happened before. You could say the same thing about sermons, I suppose, and if I had to name the 2 or 3 sermons contained in me, one of them would have to be something like what I'm going to preach this morning. It's a sermon with a very simple message, really, which is that our stories are what make us human. We are essentially storytelling animals. As the Nigerian writer Chinua Achebe put it, we create our stories, and our stories in turn create us. So let me begin with a story. It's a story about how I came to believe so strongly in the transformative power of stories. So, once upon a time, in the fall of 1978 to be exact, shortly after I had moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts to begin divinity school, I met a man who changed my life, and more than any other single person was responsible for my love of stories and storytelling. I didn't meet him in the classroom, however. In fact, I met him on the street one afternoon when I was wandering through Harvard Square in search of a used bookstore. His name was Hugh Morgan Hill, although I didn't learn that until much later. For the time being, I only knew him as Brother Blue. I think there's a picture of him projected on the screen, or will be. Brother Blue was appropriately named. The day I met him, he was dressed from head to toe in 7 shades of blue. There were beautiful rainbows embroidered on his denim shirt, and a big, bright, enameled butterfly was pinned to his royal blue vest. He also had colorful butterflies painted on his bony brown cheeks and on the palms of his fluttering hands. There were curly, multicolored ribbons sprouting out from his sleeves like stuffing from a psychedelic scarecrow. He also had, if I remember correctly, 2 or 3 helium balloons attached by strings to various parts of his costume. He was quite a sight. Brother Blue always dressed like this when he was in his storytelling mode, which was pretty much all the time. As you can imagine, he was hard to miss, even in the busy and crowded atmosphere of Harvard Square. You can take that down now, yeah. So, the very first words that Brother Blue spoke to me were, "Peekaboo." You have to understand, he says that to everybody, but for some reason, those simple, silly words touched a place deep inside of me. They penetrated all of my intellectual and emotional defenses and entered my heart. As Brother Blue himself would have put it, he had succeeded in reaching the soul that be in the middle of me. So I fell instantly in love with this man, the way some Eastern disciples are said to fall in love with their guru. And over the next few years, I spent a lot of time hanging out with him, listening to his stories, remembering my own, and learning to play peekaboo with the world. Along with a few other students at the Divinity School, I applied for and received academic credit for this peculiar apprenticeship. It was called Theological Field Education, and we did cover the field. And that's because Brother Blue was a peripatetic storyteller, spinning his magic web of stories anywhere and everywhere. Schools, hospitals, folk festivals, prisons, nursing homes, theaters, television studios, city parks, libraries, even churches. One year, he was invited to tell a story to a noontime gathering on Good Friday at a posh Episcopal church on fashionable Newbury Street in Boston. When he reached the climax of his story, Brother Blue literally leaped out of the high pulpit to illustrate a theological point, I'm sure. Unfortunately, he landed poorly, broke his leg badly, and had to spend a week in the hospital and several months on crutches. That didn't keep him from telling stories, though. The next time our little class met, his wife Ruth brought a cassette recorder and played a tape he'd made from his hospital bed, which began, of course, with him saying, "Peekaboo." And Brother Blue was a street preacher by choice. Originally from a poor neighborhood in Cleveland, Ohio, he had served in World War II as a first lieutenant in an all-black unit of a segregated army. After the war, as a scholarship student, he earned a bachelor's degree from Harvard, a master's in fine arts from the Yale School of Drama, and a doctorate from Union Graduate School. A deeply spiritual person, he viewed his storytelling as a sacred calling. Every story, he used to say, is praying out loud. So when the time came for my own ordination into ministry, I asked Brother Blue if he would tell a story at the service in place of the usual traditional sermon, and I was honored when he accepted the invitation. I had chosen the overall theme of Jonah for the service, selecting the music and the readings to build upon that biblical story, which was and remains one of my favorites. It seemed especially appropriate for my ordination because it's a story about an inner struggle in response to an outer call. And I had struggled long and hard with my decision to enter the ministry. The entire text of Jonah was read at the service. It's a short book. And then Brother Blue took over, providing a kind of improvisational jazz commentary on the story. He retold this great biblical fish tale in such a way that the entire church sanctuary became, for the duration of the telling, the belly of the whale. The great arched wooden beams overhead, which rafters that had been hewn out of the New England forests by Yankee shipbuilders, they became the huge creature's ribs. And the heavy oak doors through which we had all entered, those doors were the creature's mouth, now firmly closed. And there we were, all of us, wrapped in a magical, mythical dream time and sacred space, a womb in which all of the possibilities of our lives were vividly imaginable. We were enchanted, held in a spell. Now, the details of the story that Brother Blue told that day are not important. What is important, what I do remember, is the feeling of being lured and led along by the power and the beauty of the story itself. A narrative that included me with all of my questions, struggles, doubts, choices, hopes, fears, and desires. I felt that I'd been swept away and carried along on my life's great sea journey by the sheer power of the story. I was transported like Jonah, powerfully and fearfully and wonderfully, until at last I was heaved up on the dry ground of the everyday world, feeling amazed and a little bit dazed, but glad to be alive and eager to get on with the journey into ministry. I truly felt commissioned, empowered, ordained. Stories are like that. They are vessels that both hold us and transport us, and sometimes transform us in the process. Sometimes we find ourselves living inside a story, so completely wrapped up in its drama, so totally absorbed that we are not aware that things could be any different. The myth has swallowed us up and engulfed us with its seemingly inescapable narrative logic. And when we live inside such an all-encompassing story, We may say things like, that's why the things are the way they are. That's just the way things happen in this family or this town or this fellowship or this world. That's the story of my life. That's the story of our life. At other times, we might find ourselves suddenly standing outside the framework of a story that had sustained us up until then. We feel cast away on an unknown beach, wondering, what happened to my world? Because in a very real sense, if we do not have a story, we do not have a coherent world at all. Such a loss of a grounding narrative can be devastating to one's sense of self. Yet, as the great Danish novelist and short story writer Isak Dinesen wrote, all sorrows can be borne if you can put them in a story or tell a story about them. Stories are not, as we sometimes think, merely decorative entertainment embroidered on the surface of life. Stories make up the very fabric of our existence. Stories are woven deeply into ourselves and in our communities. I really do agree with the poet Muriel Rukeyser, who said the universe is made not of atoms, but of stories. Stories really are that fundamental, at least for human beings. We can't live without meaning, and narrative is the primary way that we human beings navigate and negotiate meaning. We seize upon the concrete details of a story, the movement, the action, the plot, and we want to know, where's this going? Where are we going? What does this all mean? And all of this has ethical consequences, of course. Ethics is not primarily a matter of following rules. It's primarily a matter of cultivating character. And character is formed where characters are found, that is to say, in stories. The American philosopher Alistair MacIntyre put it this way: I can only answer the ethical question, what am I to do, if I can answer the prior question of what story or stories do I find myself a part? Now, when we pursue this question, we find it to be the case that we belong to multiple stories. We live in stories which are contained inside other stories, which are in turn enclosed within other still larger stories, kind of like those little Russian matryoshka nesting dolls. At the most basic level, the personal, individual level, are what we think of as our personal stories, that autobiographical thread that gives me a sense of continuity as a self through time. At the next level, we find our story. Beyond my story, there's a sense of who we are, what are the communities and the loyalties and the commitment I have to groups larger than myself and, let's say, my family. So that's the level of our story. This is where we find ethnic identities or national identities, other kinds of storied characters. And then beyond that lies the all-encompassing great stories. These are those narrative patterns that express what is true universally, not just for me, not just for us, but for everyone. Those stories, those great stories that contain those universal truths. Now, until recently in the West, the Christian myth has functioned as that great story for a large majority of people, but that is no longer the case in what has been called our postmodern times. That great narrative overcoat of many colors has been worn down by the forces of modernity to barely a button's worth of fabric, just enough to tell a story. And yet, if we're to believe Elie Wiesel, Sometimes a story may be enough. Enough just to be able to tell the story may suffice. Now, I think that our role as religious liberals is to tell a better story, to tell a bigger story, a story that is radically honest and inclusive and hopeful. In other words, a truly transformative story. The Canadian First Nations novelist Thomas King concluded his wonderful little book called The Truth About Stories with a concise and challenging invitation. You want a different ethic? He asked. Tell a different story. Transforming stories can't simply be invented, however. They have to arise authentically and gradually from the depths of our human experience as we engage with the world. We don't concoct them so much as we discover them or let them discover us. The Jewish theologian Martin Buber tells a story that I think beautifully illustrates this transformative power. Buber's grandfather, who was in his old age quite lame, had once been a disciple of the famous rabbi, the Baal Shem Tov, who was mentioned earlier. When he was asked to tell a story about his teacher, the old man described how his rabbi, when he prayed, would jump up and down and dance in the Hasidic fashion. And in the process of telling this story, Buber said, his old grandfather would rise up from his chair, and carried away by the emotion of the narrative, he would begin to move and dance about the room, forgetting that he was lame in his own ecstasy. And Buber concludes this little story by saying, "That's the way to tell a story." I recall a similar scenario with Brother Blue. He had received a set of slave chains as a gift from Conrad Wright, the distinguished Unitarian professor of American church history at Harvard Divinity School. And Brother Blue would sometimes use those chains in his storytelling. Once I remember he told a story in the Suffolk County Jail, a story about freedom. And as he talked, he would shake these chains, he would move and dance and sing his powerful and liberating stories. The telling of the story in that context, the telling of the story was itself an act of liberation. The story enacted the very freedom that was its message. And I feel something of that freedom when I talk about Brother Blue. Simply by telling stories about him, I can feel his excitement, his enthusiasm, his freedom, and in a certain sense, I experience a healing or revitalization of those parts of myself that are lame or stale or enslaved and in need of liberation and healing. So certain stories have the power to transform us. These are what I call transforming stories. So I invite you to honor the transforming stories of your own life, to pay attention to them and to contemplate them for the meaning that they contain for you, the meanings they contain for you. You all have a Brother Blue in your life, and you are Brother Blue for others. You know, we are interwoven with these stories. So pay attention to your stories and try to connect them with the stories of others, the places where our stories overlap or intersect and interact. Karen told a lovely story last Sunday about the net of Indra, with those nodes of interwoven or intersecting strands. And think of those, where your stories, the strand of your story intersects with someone else's, those nodal points where we connect and create community. So pay attention to that level as well. And finally, I invite you to listen for the resonances in your story and our story, to listen for the resonances with the great stories, those universal teachings of the world's religious and philosophical traditions, what the scholar Houston Smith liked to call the winnowed wisdom of the world. Those stories resonate with our own. In all of those ways, we may come to experience the power of transforming stories. I think that is the primary purpose of religious fellowship. Some historians claim that the ancient Greek polis, the city-state, was created to provide a place for returning veterans to tell the stories of the Trojan War. In other words, democracy was invented to make the world safe for storytelling. Be that as it may, I do know that the church was created precisely as a place to experience and share the transformative power of stories. Likewise, this fellowship is a place where people may come to create a fabric of meaning by weaving together the warp and the woof of our individual and collective stories, all held together. Think of it as a loom, and our stories, personal stories and our communal stories, intersect and overlap and create this pattern. All of that is held together by the frame of the loom, which we might think of as the great stories of the world's wisdom traditions that create that context within which our stories together make meaning. My hope is that our ministry together will be one that is characterized by a deep and humble listening to one another's stories, and that this place will be a place, will continue to be a place where we create a beautiful, warm, and compassionate fabric of community. May it be so. So it appears that we have a little time for congregational response. If anyone has something they'd like to share, maybe I should bring this microphone out